Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 20th Annual Norman Borlaug Lecture. I'm Don Bites. I'm a professor in the departments of Animal Science and of Biochemistry, and also the chair of the Nutritional Science Council, one of the co-sponsors for tonight's event. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here tonight, and I'd like to also welcome all of our folks who are watching virtually as this session is being live streamed. The lecture is appropriately named in honor of Dr. Norman Borlaug, the famous native Iowan who became known as the father of the Green Revolution and the man who fed the world. For his contributions, they will be summarized a bit later. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Wendy Winterstein, the president of Iowa State University, who will introduce our speaker for the Borlaug Lecture. Dr. Winterstein grew up in the state of Kansas. She earned a BS degree in crop production from Kansas State University. She found her way to Iowa State, where she earned a PhD degree in entomology. After her graduate program, she became a professor at Iowa State with a focus on the extension of pest management. After different administrative roles in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, she became Dean of Agriculture in 2006. And by most standards of measure, she was an outstanding dean for our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. President Winterstein will introduce, well, first of all, I should say that in 2017, she became president of Iowa State University. Isn't that important to mention? We love you, Wendy. President Winterstein will introduce our speaker for the 20th Annual Borlaug Lecture. Dr. Winterstein.
Thank you, Don. Dr. Bites, distinguished professor in the departments of animal science and biochemistry, an individual that has taught 50 years at Iowa State University. Let's have a round of applause for a faculty member like that. Well, the lecture program is one of the most prestigious and important events held each year at Iowa State University. We are honored to host this event as part of the annual celebration of one of Iowa's most distinguished and influential citizens, Dr. Norman Borlaug. The lecture is held every year as part of the World Food Prize Week to recognize Dr. Borlaug's legacy as founder of the World Food Prize and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Known as the father of the Green Revolution, Dr. Borlaug believed he was selected for the Nobel Peace Prize to, quote, symbolize the vital role of agriculture and food production in a world that is hungry both for bread and peace. Dr. Borlaug is credited with saving more than 1 billion people from starvation through his achievements in wheat research and production, combined with his passion for helping people gain the knowledge and the tools to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities. Dr. Borlaug's achievements continue to serve as an enduring inspiration to all of us in continuing his transformational work. I want to recognize and thank the coordinators and sponsors and partners for the 2021 Norman Borlaug Lecture, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, the College of Human Sciences, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Seed Science Center, the Nutritional Sciences Council, the Committee on Lectures funded by student government, and the World Food Prize Foundation. Thank you all for making this event possible. A round of applause for our sponsors. We are very pleased that we could return this year to having an in-person event. Since last year's lecture was held in a virtual format, we invited the 2020 World Food Prize laureate to join us this evening to be recognized. Dr. Ratan Lal was awarded the World Food Prize last year in recognition of his work to promote innovative soil-saving techniques benefiting the livelihoods of more than 500 million smallholder farmers, improving the food and nutritional security of more than 2 billion people, and saving hundreds of millions of hectares of natural tropical ecosystems. A distinguished professor of soil sciences and founding director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center at The Ohio State University, Dr. Law has demonstrated not only how healthy soils are a crucial component of sustainable agricultural intensification, but he also identified the promise of soils in terms of holding carbon, so carbon sequestration efforts. As a result, he transformed the way the world sees soils as both the foundation for increasing the quality and quantity of food and preserving natural ecosystems, and also an important part of mitigating climate change. Dr. Law is one of the most prolific agricultural scientists with more than 100,000 citations of his vast collection of published works. And like Dr. Borlaug, he has a passion for translating science into action, teaching others that improves soil health, enhances agricultural production, improves the nutritional quality of food, restores the environment, and mitigates climate change. We are so pleased to have the 2020 World Food Prize Laureate with us tonight. Dr. Law, would you please come forward to accept this gift from Iowa State University? A round of applause for Dr. Law. Now it is my honor to introduce tonight's esteemed speaker, the 2021 World Food Prize Laureate, Dr. Shakuntala Tillstead. Dr. Tillstead is a global lead for nutrition and public health at World Fish, an international research organization headquartered in Malaysia. She was awarded the 2021 World Food Prize for her groundbreaking research, critical insights, and landmark innovations in developing holistic, nutrition-sensitive approaches to aquatic food systems, including aquaculture and capture fisheries. Dr. Tillstead was the first to establish that commonly consumed small fish were important sources of essential micronutrients and fatty acids. Her research showed that these necessary nutrients in small fish species were much higher than previously known, and that consuming fish enhances the absorption of nutrients from plant-based foods. This knowledge has reshaped our scientific understanding of the benefits of fish in diets. In the spirit of Dr. Borlaug, Dr. Tillstead turned this science into practice, setting out to increase small fish consumption, especially for women and children in the first 1,000 days of life, the most critical period for nutrition for a child's development. She pioneered more efficient and sustainable fish farming methods and promoted nutrition-sensitive practices and policies. Dr. Tillstead's seminal achievements have greatly increased the supply and year-round consumption of nutritious, safe fish and fish products in Bangladesh. Her approach has since been scaled up and gained traction in nourishing nations across Asia and Africa. Through her many collaborations with national and global organizations and public and private sectors, she is setting the agenda for nutrition-sensitive, holistic supply chain development. Her leadership and mentoring of many young researchers is also paying great dividends. Their collective efforts have benefited nutrition outcomes for millions of people and are reaching more vulnerable populations every day. It is my honor and privilege to welcome the 2021 World Food Prize Laureate, Dr. Tillstead. Thank you, Dr. Tillstead.
Thank you all for coming here today to hear me talk. And firstly, I'd like to thank the president of the Iowa State University, Dr. Winterstein. Thank you so much for your introduction. And to Professor Bites for starting off the ceremonies. My presentation today is termed Aquatic Foods for Nourishing Nations. And I do think that Dr. Winterstein gave a very good introduction. So perhaps I should just open up for questions and answers, and we can pass by the presentation. Today I would use this presentation to begin with the global food and nutrition security. Why is it we should be concerned about nutrition and food and nutrition security? I will talk about the UN Food Systems Summit 2021, which we just had the last meetings in September of this year, and then move on to why should we be talking about aquatic foods and the reasons that I say aquatic foods are good for nourishing nations. I'll present two papers, the UN discussion paper on aquatic foods for sustainable healthy diets, and talk also about the Blue Foods Assessment, which is being led by Stanford University and the Stockholm Resilience Center. And go on to give a little flavor of my work by talking about nutrition-sensitive approaches to aquatic food systems, and touch on 4 topics, and then leave you with some key messages that I do hope you could use in your work further. Let's talk about global food and nutrition security. So every year, we who work in food and nutrition wait with expectation to see the new report that's termed the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World. It's given out every year. And what we see now is that after years of progress with respect to food and nutrition security, that the situation is a bit dire and also caused by COVID-19 pandemic. But not just COVID, it's also caused by disruptions that we see, many other disruptions, refugees, wars, and movements of people across the globe. And if we look at where do you see the greatest number of people facing hunger, of course it's where the populations are greatest, but it's worth taking in stock that it's Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, where I come from. So that if you would want to change the situation in the world and have a better food and nutrition security, then our efforts must be focused on these regions of the world. As I said, the situation has changed with just the last 2 years, with more people having less access to food. And what is worrying, I do think, is that in these data, we are seeing a gender gap. So more women are being food insecure than men. And this is quite worrisome. So not only do we have to look at specific regions of the world, but we also have to disaggregate our data and disaggregate our solutions, solutions that fit to women and solutions that fit to men. And if we go to the population of children that we have, 1 in 5 is stunted. And this is extremely worrisome because growth and development of children follows them for the rest of their lives, and it's intergenerational. A healthy woman gives birth to a healthy child. So the state of our children is extremely important for how we improve food and nutrition security globally. Let me move to another global development that we've had, the UN Food Systems Summit 2021, where both Dr. Lal and I have been engaged. So for 2 years, we have started with deliberations and dialogues and many meetings in different parts of the world on all levels of food systems. And the tone of the UN Food Systems Summit 2021 is that it's a people's summit. How well we came across with that is to be judged by the actions we would take afterwards. So the global food systems talk about transformation to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I'm sure most of you know about the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this process leading up to September 2021, the science group of the UN Food Systems Summit looked at the evidence, reviewed a lot of the science, and came up with 7 priorities. And one of these priorities is on aquatic foods, talking about the diversity of aquatic foods and the nutritional value of aquatic foods, and also aquatic foods for taking care of the environments. So in conclusion to this deliberation, one can say that the transformation of food systems, which is the goal of the summit, will be incomplete without the inclusion of aquatic foods. And going further with the process of the summit, 5 action areas have been included, and these action areas are the ones in which solutions are to be found to be implemented by member states. And 2 of these action areas, well, I will just take one that I think is extremely important. If we would include aquatic foods in the school meals programs that we have in so many countries, and which has become so very important now in the time of COVID-19. Let me go back to aquatic foods. So what are aquatic foods? Most of us in this room today would think only about fish if we talk about aquatic foods. And at that, we would perhaps, if I would ask you to name the number of fish species that you know, perhaps we may come up to 10, or not very much more. If I'm in Bangladesh and I go to the village and I ask children to name me, or Cambodia, and I go to the villages and ask children to name me fish species, in no time at all, I'd come up to over 30, 40 fish species. But not only fish species, there are thousands out there, but all aquatic foods, which include animals, plants, and microorganisms. For example, seaweed. And seaweed is an up-and-coming area now that everyone is talking about in terms of nutritional value and also in terms of sustainability. The other fundamental point about aquatic foods is that when many, especially in the Western world, talk about aquatic foods, we talk about marine sources. But you go to Africa, you go to Asia, you go to other parts of the world, then you would see that there are many diverse sources of waters and many diverse sources of aquatic foods, which include rivers, lakes. I work a lot with the Great Lakes of Africa, and it's amazing to see the impact that fisheries has on populations in Africa. When we would talk about the value of aquatic foods, The data we have shows that 3.3 billion people consume some form and some amount of aquatic foods globally, and that 800 million people depend on aquatic foods for livelihoods and income. We do know that this data is perhaps an underestimation of what we see, because we do not really capture a lot of the small-scale fisheries that take place. Some of you in this audience have heard me talk about aquatic foods as superfoods. And if you would like me to talk about, when I talk about fish and other aquatic foods, and I talk about nutrients, I don't talk about protein, well, you'll have to invite me back to give a course over a whole semester to tell you why I do not focus on protein and why I focus on micronutrients and essential fatty acids. So as you can see here, there are multiple micronutrients, vitamins and minerals that are found in fish and other aquatic foods, and the essential fatty acids that are so important for cognition in children, found in fish and other aquatic foods. So this is where I would like the narrative to change, and this is where I would like to put the focus on the true value of aquatic foods. And if you look at the many benefits you have, we can recognizing the diversity of aquatic foods for fish, for its food and nutrition benefits, for the socio-economic benefits, and also for the environmental benefits. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of talk now about using seaweed in production systems for the environmental benefits. Aquatic foods for nourishing nations. How do we get there, and how do we use the true potential of aquatic foods for nourishing nations? And this means a change in the narrative from feeding a global growing population, to nourishing people and planet. And why do I want to see that change? When you talk about feeding, the notion is about quantity and the energy value of foods. So there's a lot of focus on the few staple foods that make up the diet. If we would shift the narrative to nourishing, then we would also include the quality of foods in terms of nutritional quality, the micronutrients and essential fatty acids that I've talked about, but also importantly about the food safety of diverse foods. So, and another important shift is that in the past, when we talk about feeding, we talk about production systems. When you talk about nourishing nations, people and planet, we talk about engaging actors. We talk about the people who are engaged in the food systems, not just what we produce. And also a shift, not begin to talk about people and the people-centered approach with those who produce, but begin with the consumers. We are all consumers, and then move back through the supply chains to the production systems. This narrative with respect to aquatic foods is not easy to have, because aquatic foods are undervalued and they are unrecognized. So we have to first drum up the attention, get the evidence on the table, look at the data that we have, create the data, go out and analyze it, and look at what's happening in the field. And recently we've done this with 2 papers, and I'd like to, if you are interested, you should go look up these papers. The first one is on the UN nutrition discussion paper on aquatic foods, and the other one is what I named before on the blue food assessment, which has been going on for 2 years. It's over 100 scientists from all over the world who have been looking at different aspects of aquatic food, nutrition, production, climate change aspects of, and the environment. If I would just take the first one, the United Nations Nutrition Discussion Paper on Aquatic Foods. This was, all of this just happened in 2021, so it's quite a new field. And this is the first discussion paper of UN Nutrition. And it was done by UN Nutrition in collaboration with FAO and the World Fish, where I work. And this was extremely important because this paper fed into the UN Food System Summit, and thereby we were able to get aquatic foods on the table as one of the 7 priorities. So it addresses the need for a global narrative on nutrition. And here, this paper focuses on the aquatic foods, but we have other papers in the series that focus on other food groups. The paper that came out after this one was on livestock products. And importantly for this discussion paper is that it provides concrete recommendations to use aquatic foods in improving global food and nutrition security. So it really gives solutions which can be implemented at country level. In order that we can make this shift in the narrative from feeding to nourishing, we need to apply other approaches to the food systems. And this is where we talk about nutrition-sensitive systems. And in this case, I work with aquatic food systems, so it's nutrition-sensitive aquatic food systems approaches. And again, as I mentioned before, it begins by putting people at the center, meeting the nutritional needs of people, and especially the poor and the vulnerable, women and children in the first 1,000 days, and also taking into consideration the guidelines from the World Committee on Food Security, leaving no one behind. The other essential point with respect to nutrition-sensitive approaches, well, in fact, all approaches, when you take a food systems approach, is that we should be using multiple entry points in the food systems, not just production, but consumption, the supply chains, production, of course, and also look at the policies and governance structure that apply to food systems. And fundamental is diversity, diversity across food systems, diversity of people, and diversity of the foods we produce, and diversity of the methods of production, diversity of the products that we develop within the supply chains. I will move over to 4 examples to give you an idea about nutrition-sensitive aquatic systems approaches, and these 4 examples I've taken from the work that I have done. So the first one, and I start with consumption, is diversify consumption with aquatic foods. So what my colleagues and I have worked with is going back to communities, looking at the foods and the products that they use, talking with communities, and through that process, developing culturally acceptable and context-specific aquatic food products. And I started in Bangladesh, where we developed a fish chutney for pregnant and lactating women to be added as a condiment to the main meal. And also fish powder made from dried small fish, which we add to the complementary foods in children. And we've reached far with that. For example, in Cambodia, now the government of Cambodia, and UNICEF, they are using this product in the treatment of malnourished children. What's important, as we know from the kinds of life we live everywhere, also in rural communities, is that convenience of food, convenience of accessing foods, convenience of preparing foods. Those of you who have fed children would know how difficult it is to feed a child a meal rather than 2 biscuits, for example. So convenience is extremely important as we move forward to nourishing people and getting nutritious foods on the market. Shelf life for the poor without access to refrigeration is extremely important. And of course, affordability. So affordability is many things to many people. But one thing that you can do, for example, with aquatic foods, we do know that it's seasonal. So there are seasons of plenty. And if you would harvest in the season of plenty, then you would have aquatic foods at low prices, and these you can use to produce aquatic food products. Next, I'll talk about improving diversity in production and supply chains of aquatic foods. And this work I started in Bangladesh, and now it's moved to many different countries in Asia and also in Africa. And in Bangladesh, with 4 million household ponds, this was a very good entry point because I could get people to listen to what I was saying because it was something of importance for the country. So we developed a system of polyculture of small and large fish in the same pond. And what did and the result of this was increased production, increased productivity, at the same time increase in nutritional quality, and great engagement of women from the households. So there were triple wins to this approach. But household ponds are not the only water bodies, inland water bodies you have. There are also, in Odisha, we had very, very much success with getting the state government to give women's groups the right to farm diverse fish in village water tanks. And as you know, across many countries, not only in Asia, also in Africa, that there are wide expansions of water bodies. And in season, then these water bodies shrink, and you have ponds and other water bodies within the wetlands, which you can then use for pond polyculture. I talked a lot about how important drying of products are. And in Malawi and Zambia, we've set up solar drying tents. And this is something that has improved the livelihoods of thousands of women in just in these 2 countries alone. And in the Pacific, in the Solomon Islands, they're doing pilots with respect to solar power freezers for keeping the fish from the seas. This is where I spend much of my time, talking to governments and talking to leaders within countries and trying to get aquatic foods incorporated in national and state policies. As I mentioned in Bangladesh, we were pretty successful with the pond polyculture because the governments could easily see the benefits of pond polyculture. And also one of the strides we made is that if you would do a polyculture, you will not be cleaning the pond before you stock. So at that time, the largest single expense of pond polyculture was using pesticides to clean the ponds before you would stock. And by coming with a nutrition-sensitive approach, you removed that cost of pond polyculture. So this is something that the government thought was extremely interesting. And within the country investment plan, which is called Nutrition Sensitive Food Systems, We were extremely fortunate and very lucky to get the government and their partners, for example, BRAC in Bangladesh, to include pond polyculture as the foremost intervention for nutrition-sensitive approaches within the country. And if you would take a country with so much water, so many water bodies, and a population of 170 million, then you're going to have a quite large benefits on the population, and also an approach that can be used in other countries. The next example I'd like to give is from Odisha, the state of Odisha in India, with a population of about 70 million people. And here, the government of the state included fish products in the Odisha pathway to accelerated nutrition into this strategy. And what this means is that for poor women and children in Odisha, there are very good school feeding programs and take-home rations, rations that are given to poor and vulnerable pregnant and lactating women and adolescent girls. And within these programs, we have included fish products, dried fish and fish powder, and they are also used in the meals that children get at school. Importantly for me is the engagement of women and youth in the aquatic food systems. And if we truly want to transform the system, we have to bring in all partners, also women and youth. And if we want to move forward to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 and beyond, it's not my generation that's going to carry that further, it's also the youth to be able to carry that beyond 2030. We do know that 1 in every 2 workers engaged in fisheries and aquaculture is female. And I think I and many others know that this is an underestimation, because very often the work of women in agriculture is not recognized, it's unpaid labor, and therefore in the statistics, these women are not counted. So though the data says 1 in 2 is a woman, I really wonder if that's true, because I'm sure if we go out and do better the data collection and disaggregated data collection by sex and by age, we will be getting different values. Youth participation in aquatic food systems and across agriculture is low. And again, if we need a future for food systems and a future for nourishing people in our nations, we do need to engage youth. And some of the ways we can do this is by creating space for social inclusion through policy interventions, investments, data and technology opportunities. This is something that I think many youth would like to get engaged in. And very importantly, capacity building at all levels and of all actors within the food systems. Now, all of this demands a call to action. So let me leave you with 3 messages that I do think we should carry forward and we should be working towards. And now, with the UN Food System Summit and going further, with governments getting ready for solutions that they can carry out at country level, at all parts of the country, starting with the communities and moving up to the policy makers. I would like to leave you with that we must recognize the crucial role of aquatic foods in food, land, and water systems transformation for sustainable, nutritious, and equitable food systems. If we want to make that change of food, land, and water systems, we cannot leave out aquatic foods. That's a big part of the transformation we have to make. And there's not very much we can do without investments and funding. So we need to amplify investments in research, innovations, and scaling of aquatic foods. And that's not just taking the pie we have today of investments and cutting it up into smaller portions. No, it's growing the pie and growing the piece that's for aquatic food systems. And thirdly, and most importantly, and I really don't know how we do this, and there's a lot of research to be done here. So something for you young people to think about. We must value aquatic foods for nourishing nations beyond monetary units. When we look at how the way we value now, we talk about the quantity of food produced, and we put that in terms of many times just an energy value. You haven't heard me talk about energy. You haven't heard me talk about protein. And beyond and then we would talk about what's the value of food, and very often what's the value of food in terms of export, monetary value. We have to go beyond that. I've talked about vitamin B12 for cognition. How do you value cognition, and how do you value that a well-nourished woman gives birth to a well-nourished child? So intergenerational benefits, which are so very important for national development. So I leave you with my line that says, holistic food, land and water systems transformation is only possible with the inclusion of aquatic foods. Thank you so much.
Dr. Tillstead, thank you very much for that powerful lecture. So many important lessons in your presentation. Congratulations on an incredible career of work that's making an impact in the world. Another round of applause for Dr. Tillstead.
Thank you so much.
We'd like to open the floor up for questions. Whoa, there we go. We'd like to open the floor up for questions, and there are microphones right up here if you would want to come up to a microphone. And as we're waiting for that first question, I'll begin and ask Dr. Tillstead to share just a little bit about her journey as a scientist. We have a lot of young women in the audience, and you truly are a role model for the work that you've done to make a difference in the world. Would you mind just telling a little bit of your personal story?
Thank you, Wendy, but when you reach to my age, that's a long story. But no, so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. That's where I'm born and grew up, and come from a Hindu family, a very progressive Hindu family. And if I would say, some of the values that we were instilled, we lived in a family of multiple generations. I mean, I don't think many people are so fortunate as me to have lived with 4 generations, as I have. And my grandmother, who ruled the kitchen, but what was important for her and what she taught us is about the value of local foods. And the 2 things that I remember she would talk about: having nutritious foods for brains and for strength. And that's something that I've carried with me all my life, and also in my career. And then I was extremely fortunate in that I had a life where I loved to travel, and I traveled with my work, but extremely fortunate that my husband, Finn, who is in the audience today, he also had a career where we traveled. So we've both worked in Bangladesh, we've both worked in Nepal, Kenya, and we were in so also you have to make some smart decisions. You have to think, what do you want of your work? What do you want of your life? I could have said I wanted to work in Western countries, and then my career would have been very different. I would have ended up perhaps in a lab doing very sophisticated tests. But I wanted to work in communities, and I wanted to work in low and middle income countries. So we both sought jobs in these countries, and were able and I was able to have a career, a very meaningful career. And I hope that some of you will be inspired by the work I do, and would also want to work out of your comfort zone and travel. You have to travel. You have to be out. You have to be with the communities. You have to spend time with them. Learn about not just the issues they face, but also the solutions and their aspirations, what they would like to do.
It's a great story, and you certainly did learn about the communities where you worked and learn about their culture and what would make the food products that you were developing acceptable.
Yeah.
Very, very well done. A great story about your grandmother. Thank you for sharing that. I think we have a question right here.
Yes, actually I'll have two, if that's okay. One is, in the diversifying the producers, do you run into issues in terms of the assignment of property rights? I know the ponds are on holdings, but often the poor don't have land. So, and if it's like the U.S., bodies of water are held in common. So I was wondering how you address those sorts of issues. And the other is, fish can also be aggregators of pollutants. And so I was curious what the strategy is for trying to maintain the environmental quality. I know you said something about how the fish actually help clean the ponds, and I thought if you could expand on that.
Well, the first one, and that goes back to governance of land and water. And the example I gave from Odisha with the village water tanks, that's property of the state, and they give the right to women's groups to farm. And we see the same in Bangladesh, for example, or in Cambodia, where I also work. In the open season, that's when it's all water all over. It's open access, so it takes policies and governments to be cognizant of the values of these natural resources and use them in the way that support the communities that depend on them for food, for income, and for livelihoods. And so I do think it can be done. Of course, it takes regulations, and also that you must have a system that you can manage and see that it's being done in the right way with respect to the regulations. But I've seen it done in many places in Asia, not so much in Africa, and in fact in some of the lakes of Africa I've seen the reverse, where the water bodies are giving out to larger farmers, and then the access of the poorer fishermen are restricted. So it's up to, so we must have strong governments and strong governance in order that the system works. You asked me about the pollution of the water bodies. When I started working with quality, I come from a field of nutrition, so I only focused on the nutritional quality of foods. But very quickly I realized that in talking about quality, it's not just nutrients, it's also about food safety aspects. And that's, of course, extremely important. And now you hear much more about food safety of foods, and you hear about the One Health approach, health health of animals, health of plants, health of people, and health of the environment. I do not know much about that area, but I do think it's an area that needs a lot of much more work done, much more investments done, and then we have all this now with plastics in our waters and the pollution that can create, not only to the water but also to the animals in the water. But please do remember that if you would look at aquaculture, the production of fish, that the majority of the fish globally is produced by smallholders, and their use of antibiotics and their use of other chemicals for production is extremely low. So there's also where do you put your focus, and where are the problems, and who is it you have to direct your attention to when you would talk about safety.
Shakuntala, we've seen that you have created whole systems in countries and been able to assist the governments in not only taking small experiments that you've done on the ground and creating pond polycultures and growing them, scaling them up. You've been able to do that in very important countries like Bangladesh and Cambodia. Talk to us about how do we really scale this even more broadly to more countries in Africa where it's so needed, in South America, Latin America, and what is it about the scaling work that you've done that's been most effective, do you think?
Well, and if I would take Bangladesh, where I've reached furthest, I've worked I come from a university background in Copenhagen, and I've worked very closely with universities in the countries in where I work. So if you would take Bangladesh and you would take the universities where agriculture is taught, fisheries and aquaculture are taught, then just imagine if you, and I was able to do this, if you can change the curriculum so that these approaches that I talk about are taught at university, taught in colleges, and when these young people graduate and go out in the field, they have the knowledge that they can then use in the work that they do. That's a very, very important part of the scaling throughout the country. And I've seen it in Bangladesh. I've seen it in Nepal. I worked in the Terai in Nepal and worked with the universities in Nepal. And then it's not difficult to get the training, to get the scaling, because you have the knowledge on the ground, and this knowledge can then be passed on to the farmers and change the ways in which they think about their production system and get the assistance from agricultural officers on the ground to make this change. With policymakers, that's where it's a bit difficult. But if we would take how far we've reached with the UN Food Systems Summit, and as I mentioned in my case, the work I do, of 7 priorities, aquatic foods has been selected as one of those, then you have a very good entry point into meeting the needs that you have at country level. International organizations, as USAID, they play a major role in shaping the conversation and shaping the types of investments and shaping the types of development that take place at country level.
Dr. Tillstead, would you talk just a little bit about why fish are so important from a micronutrient perspective. We talked about this over dinner a little bit, and I think the audience would enjoy understanding how those micronutrients are measured and evaluated, and it's a great story.
And there is a lot of traditional knowledge on this. In Bangladesh, for example, there's an old age proverb that says, Mashe Bate Bengali. And if you know anything about the Bangladesh diet, you'd wonder, how could you have a proverb where fish is placed before rice? Because in Bangladesh, if you would ask someone, are you hungry or would you like some food? In both those questions, you would use the word rice. Rice is so ever important in the diet in Bangladesh. But even so, there are lots of traditional knowledge about the value of fish, and especially the value of fish for micronutrients. So women in communities have said to me, when the rains come, we see better. And we all know of the importance of vitamin A for eyesight, for healthy eyesight. And it took me some time to figure that one out because I couldn't see what the waters had to do with eyesight. But then talking more with them, I realized that with waters come fish. And then when they eat the fish, then their eyesight improves. So I took the fish back. I couldn't do the experiments, the laboratory experiments in Bangladesh. I took them back to Denmark, to the labs in Denmark. I sent some to labs in Australia. I sent some to labs in USA to look at the nutritional composition of fish. And I'd love to do the same with seaweed, because seaweed has extremely high concentrations of vitamin B12, which is, as I said, so very important for cognition. But these are not the way that traditionally fish, which is the only type of aquatic foods that we think about in countries like here, is thought about. You'd only look at the protein content, and so therefore the laboratory methods for measuring protein have been developed. The laboratory methods for measuring vitamin A components in fish is found in less than 10 universities, because they measure retinol. They do not measure dehydroretinol, which is a component found in fish and other aquatic foods. So there's so much more work to be done. We've also done work on the methods that are used for minerals, calcium, iron, and zinc. And we are not satisfied with the methods that we are using, because these are methods that have been adapted from, for example, meats for fish, and they may not be we may need to adjust the methods to get the true value of aquatic foods.
Great. We have a question right here.
You had mentioned seaweed and carbon sequestration. Is there a particular species of freshwater plant that you favor above others that help you with your carbon, as well as the nitrate cycle issues that come from having overstocked or fully stocked ponds and water sources?
We don't know, because we don't have the value. And if you just take seaweed, I'm told, I haven't started working with the nutritional value of seaweed as yet. I'm told that, oh, Shakuntala, where would you start? There are over 10,000 species. So we can start with of course, you have to start somewhere. So we should be starting with the ones, go out to the communities, ask them which are the ones they like, which are the ones they eat, and how they use them, and use these for our experiments. When you talk about water plants, Cambodia, for example, there are so many water plants that are used in the diets. if I would ask here how many water plants are used in diets, I would think not zero. So there's a lot of work for your generation to do.
Very good. Well, this has been a great evening, a great conversation. Clearly, Dr. Tillstead's work has laid the foundation and made a tremendous impact. But as she has said here tonight, there's a lot more work to do. And I know that that work is going to continue not only through Dr. Tillstead, but others around the world, and hopefully some of you as well. So a round of applause again for Dr. Tillstead. And now
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
And now it's my honor to present to Dr. Tillstead a statue of Norman Borlaug. So let me step over here and pick that up.
Thank you so much.
And then it sits on this little platform. Very nice.
Thank you. Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Again, it's been a delightful evening. Appreciate so much Dr. Tillstead being with us. Appreciate our partnership with the World Food Prize. We look forward to seeing you next year with the new laureate from 2022. Thank you all.
Thank you.